Welcome back to another Monday Buckeye Talk from cleveland.com. It's Mark It Down Monday, which means we're marking it down. Doug Maurice, Nathan Baird, Stephen Means. A little weird. This one, Nathan, is this one weird?
Yep.
It's not as simple as receiving yards for Marvin Harrison Jr. or rushing yards for somebody or tackle leaders or sacks. Is this one weird?
It is weird, and it's a little bit harder to pin because we are guessing, or not guessing, predicting, analyzing so many different factors that go into one thing.
So what is that thing? We are marking down what percent of plays in 2023 for the Ohio State Buckeyes will be pass plays. And then you do the minus thing, and then you get the run plays. So, like, here's how it would be. Like, all the plays is 100% of the plays. And then what percent of them did they throw the ball, and what percent of them did they run the ball? Now, this is inelegant. This counts scrambles as runs. This counts wide bubble screens as passes, when actually, like the way Ryan Day thinks about it, those are actually part of the run game. It counts RPO, which is a run pass option. It counts a throw out of that as a pass, when actually Ryan Day thinks of that as part of the run game, right? It's a difference between how you threaten the defense and what the stats show. But that other stuff, I don't know. What are we supposed to do? We always talk about it. Hey, we're going to go back and track. We're going to count the real run yards and the real pass yards. That takes so much work. Otherwise, the stats are... So we're going by the stats that are sitting in front of you. At the end of the year, they say, this is how many plays Ohio State ran. This is how many passes they threw. Everything else was a rushing attempt. Sacks are in rushing it. No, where are sacks in? Sacks are in rushing attempts, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's part of it. So that's confusing. It's like, well, I dropped back to pass. It was a pass play, but I got sacked. Now it's a rushing attempt. We're just going by the stats, but it tells us something, I think, Stephen, because in the end, we compare it to what Ohio State has done. So, for instance, last year, by the raw stats, Ohio State threw the ball on 46.8% of their plays, and they ran the ball on 53.2% of their plays. So, for instance, Stephen, we have a comparison to how they did it last year. Do we think they should run it more, pass it more? And that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for a comparison of Ohio State against itself, compared to seasons of the past when they've been the most successful, when they've been less successful. The raw stats, even though they're inelegant, Stephen, can tell us that a little bit, right? As long as we have the context of what the Buckeyes have done before.
Yeah, and I mean, you work in the sacks and scrambles and stuff like that, as you know, it kind of skews your numbers a little bit, but most of this stuff is purposeful, especially in an offense like this, especially the last 2 years with CJ Stroud coming in as the starting quarterback, where he wasn't getting sacked that often and he really didn't run. So a lot of the stuff outside of bubble screens were purposeful pass plays and purposeful run plays.
That's a big part of this. And I do think, Nathan, do you think there is some decent comparisons here? Dwayne Haskins didn't run at all. Justin Fields was more willing to run. We certainly have some stats we're going to compare back to the days of like J.T. Barrett when you had a running quarterback. The last one I went back to is 2014. Is there a good enough comparison between C.J. Stroud the last 2 seasons as a quarterback who just did not run that much, did not scramble that much, and what we will expect from Kyle McCord and Devin Brown, that part of the statistical comparison should be pretty similar? Things did change from Justin Fields to C.J. Stroud. How much do you think they will change in terms of how much running the quarterback does in 2023 compared to what we were used to the last 2 seasons?
Well, that's what was sort of fascinating about this exercise to me, was that on one hand, I'm trying to project what kind of quarterback this guy is going to be. But on one hand, we have to think about what Ryan Day wants the distribution of the offense to be. There's been a potentially, I would argue, maybe a development, a evolution in the way that Ryan Day, as there should be, as anybody would, over the span of, if you go all the way back to when he first joined the program, now you're talking about 6 seasons. So Ryan Day probably wouldn't call the same plays for every play that year in 2017 as he would for every play in 2022, or for 2023, certainly the ones coming ahead. So it's both. You're trying to pinpoint, You're trying to line up two moving targets a little bit, right? Like what is this next guy going to be? But where is the brain of the Ohio State offense right now? And then on top of that, Ryan Day may not be the one calling plays this fall. We expect he is probably not going to be the one calling plays this fall. That's another wrinkle to add to all of this.
So in the last 9 seasons, going back to 2014, Ohio State has thrown more passes than it has rushing attempts, with all the caveats that we've spelled out. Once. 1 for 9. The only season, even in 2018, which like blows your mind. How is it even possible? But they had 2 backs to feed in 2018, and J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber, so that was part of it. Dwayne Haskins wasn't a running quarterback. We knew they chucked it around, but they still ran the ball more often than they threw it in 2018. Barely. The only season in the last 9 years with more pass plays than run plays by the raw stats was 2021, year 1 of C.J. Stroud. 53.9% pass plays, 46.1% run plays. Otherwise, here is your pass play percentage the last 9 years. Again, these are pass plays. What percent of your offense was throwing the ball? A forward pass out of the quarterback's hand. 2022, 46.8%. 21, 53.9. 2020, 39.5. It's a 60-40 breakdown, run to pass. 2019, 38%. 2018, 49.6%, basically 50-50. 2017, 42.8. 2016, which is the last year of a fully Urban Meyer, no Ryan Day offense, 41.2. So that's a 60-40 breakdown, run versus pass, basically, 59-41. 2015, 43.5. 2014, 37.2. So they won the national title in 2014, running the ball on 63% of their plays. Steven, do you think people hearing that, Steven, are shocked? Or is it like, oh, yeah, you got to run it? You're taking into account, again, as Nathan said, there's a million things. This is late game, running out the clock in blowouts, maybe a whole fourth quarter of handing off the walk-ons where you're not going to let your quarterbacks throw it very much. That's folded into this. This is not precise. This is raw. But Steven, still, one time in 9 years, more passes than runs. Unexpected or not that surprising?
No, I wasn't surprised when I looked at that because I looked at a lot of that same stuff too. Even the 2018 one, it was what I thought it would be, where it's still run leads, but I think it was 9 is the difference between run and the pass in that situation. Just because there's so many situations where it's just simply we're kicking the team's butt and we're running the clock out. And this is still, I don't know if even in this world that Ohio State lives in now with elite quarterback play, elite receiving play, or elite passing game, they still play in the Big Ten. This is not the Big 12, so I don't know if it's ever going to flip because you're always going to have to prepare yourself for the Northwestern game. It won't always be that bad, but just a day where you can't throw it around. You know, there's always going to be those games at the beginning of the season where you're up by 50 at halftime, so you're just trying to get out of there. So it's so they're going to pass more than they run really is more emphasized in playoff games more than it is throughout the entire season because I don't even know if that's possible throughout the entire season.
Nathan, when we compare the 2 C.J. Stroud seasons, and in 2021, they threw the ball 54% of the time. In 2022, they threw the ball 47% of the time, roughly. That's a 7% drop. Is there something in that number that tells us something? Is that related to the conversation about them trying to be physical, them trying to be tough, them trying to emphasize the run a year ago? Or is it, do you think more, well, the Northwestern game was windy, so they didn't throw it as much and they had some blowouts, or that number tell you something?
I think it probably does tell us something about Ohio State wanting to emphasize the running game, maybe overemphasize it at times last season. But there's a third number, well, actually third and fourth number that I actually think are interesting here in this context. Or maybe it's actually one number. That number is 1. Because those 2 seasons are basically mirror images of each other in terms of the run-pass balance. 53-2 running to 46-8 passing in 2022, 46-1 to 53-9 in 2021. You know where Ohio State ranked nationally in yards per play in both those seasons? First. They were the best offense in the country both of those seasons, regardless of what that balance was. And that was what was a little bit eye-opening to me. And we've talked around that in so many ways, right? It's not like we haven't acknowledged that Ohio State had the best offense in the country, yards per play, the last 2 years. And it's not like we have never acknowledged how that run-pass balance changed. But I don't know if we ever matched it up that way and said that this personnel, it was the same quarterback. They used a completely opposite balance in terms of the run-pass, with some of the same weapons, but then in 2022, and an important weapon taken off the field, and actually you could go beyond that and talk about the running backs being all chopped up all year, and still we're the best offense in the country. That I thought was interesting as I thought about this too, because it made me think that maybe we can't maybe think too much about personnel, and maybe the personnel beyond the quarterback. Maybe we need to mostly be thinking about just what Ryan Day is going to have to do to win every single game.
I think they should throw it more than they run it every year from now until Ryan Day stops being the head coach at Ohio State. And we'll discuss that more after this on Buckeye Talk.